last video I mentioned the passing of the fish collector Dominic Isla, and myself and some others went to his apartment after he passed and went through all of his stuff. And one of the things that he had that I brought back to Select Aquatics was a hydroponics light hood that he used for growing orchids. It was missing a couple of bulbs, so I went to a hydroponics store to go ahead and find out if this was something I could use in the room downstairs. And so while I was there looking at the bulbs and such, I saw these. I was at a big hydroponics store, and I was looking at walls and walls of fertilizers. And I asked one of the managers there, can you use any of these things in an aquarium? And he kind of looked at me strange and said they had no idea. So I said, well, can I get from you a number of samples, and I'll buy a few things as well. And I left there with a bunch of different dry fertilizers. And then I got on the phone and contacted some friends that I knew that knew something about fertilizers and what was required for aquatic fertilizers. And I contacted the companies on a couple of the brands that I liked for what they offered and what they did. And anyway, after 3 years of discussions and phone calls and testing here at Select Aquatics, I produced a fertilizer that was made specifically for a larger fish room. The point being that I used to use the little 1 gallon bottles of commercially available fertilizers that you buy at the pet store or whatever, and they would run me about $40 and would last me 6 months. And I said, there's got to be a better way. The hydroponics fertilizers are sold in bulk in large quantities much more inexpensively. And so I was able to go ahead and buy the raw materials, mix it here, and produce a fertilizer where this single container of fertilizer, it's about 6 ounces of fertilizer in here, will treat 44,000 gallons of water. You simply put 1.5 teaspoons of this into a gallon of water. It mixes very easily. And then 1 turkey baster full will treat a 30-gallon tank for 2 weeks. And they got no complaints from anyone with respect to its effect on fish or invertebrates. And it does not encourage algae growth. And it's just worked out to be great stuff. So anyway, we'll go ahead in this video and I'll answer some questions regarding the fertilizer and hopefully explain it to you a little bit. And if you've got any questions or any thoughts on the fertilizer, please email me at selectaquatics@gmail.com, and I can either get some out to you or answer for you a little bit about what it does. I have people asking me if this requires CO2 or if you can use CO2 in your tank with it. It certainly doesn't require it. I don't know that, I've never had anybody using CO2 said there was a problem, but it shouldn't be necessary. I also wouldn't mix it with other fertilizers if possible. I would use just that. This is turned out to be a very full, broad spectrum, well-rounded fertilizer, adapted for aquatic plants, and at a dosage that's appropriate for the home aquarium. So thank you very much. For our first question today, Larry asks, several years ago, I bought a package of your Rapid Grow Fertilizer. At the time, I jokingly told you it was a one-time sale as I only had a 70-gallon Planet aquarium. It would still be true except for a problem. I just got a tub out of the closet I keep it in to mix up another batch. When I opened it, the contents had turned brown and clumped as if it had absorbed water from the air. Or maybe just age, as our house is both air-conditioned and heated, and the humidity stays relatively low. And eastern Washington is sagebrush country as well. Our summer humidity is around 20 to 30%. So my questions are, is the fertilizer still good? It does still dissolve in water. Would it be safe to heat it in the microwave or an oven to dry it out? Or, since we're still running the heat here, just sit it on a register? Well, that's happened to me here too. When we get this stuff, I ship these in these little Glad containers, that you can get at any supermarket. And they're great containers, they're perfect for this, but they're not the most airtight containers in the world. And most of us keep our fertilizer in the fish room where the air is extra humid anyway. I tend to find that it was absorbing moisture for me, and so now what I do is I just keep it in a Ziploc bag. Other customers tell me they just go ahead and transfer it over to a jar with a tighter fitting top. However you want to do it, but you do want to keep the moisture away from it, because for some reason with this fertilizer, it's really moisture sensitive. It absorbs the moisture out of the air really easily. I continued to use it. It was still fine. It lasted just fine as it got wet and all of that. But it just got messy after a while. It would get kind of muddy and goopy and that. So you don't want to do that. So I just only keep it clean now, and I don't have any problems. As to putting it in a microwave or an oven, I've tried it, and customers have tried it and written me about it. It just doesn't work. I don't know why, but it just kind of turns into a crust. To try to dry it out and have it return to the nice, pretty white powder that it is now, it just isn't going to happen. So the best bet is to use it for as long as you can, to keep it dry. And then if you need more, it's inexpensive. The reason why we're talking about this is that each one of these containers can treat 44,000 gallons. So that's going to last you a while. So when you store it, if you store it in the fish room, particularly if it's ever left open, you're just going to end up with a humid, moist, muddy kind of stuff after a short period of time, and you probably don't want to work with that. So best to keep it dry, get the longest use you can out of it. When you mix up a batch, I generally will refrigerate the batch to keep whatever I'm not using, and I'll continue to use it for months until I start seeing the water turning slightly cloudy or possibly getting any mold or anything in it, and then I go ahead and I toss it. But the batch, after you mix it up, is good for at least a month to 2 months. So anyway, it's great stuff, and if any of you do have any issues with it, I've sold over about 300 now and haven't heard a word from anyone as far as there being any problems with fish or invertebrates. And look forward to talking to you about it if you have any questions. Thanks. Okay, Phil writes, "Hi Greg. Okay, so Phil wrote me before because his fish had some cloudy eye stuff going on. I think he said he had some Popeye stuff going on, and he wanted to know how to take care of it in his tank. And so he's following up here. Hi Greg, I used the salt first. I did not see much improvement, so I got the medicine and dosed him according to directions for 7 days. His right eye is still cloudy, but his left cleared up. I did the 25% water change yesterday. Should I add salt again and or use the meds again? Thanks for your help." Okay, so when you get a problem like this, the majority of these kinds of things are bacterial. And when these types of things happen, a little bit of whiteness in the fins, maybe white patches on the body, a little bit of cloudy eye, sometimes some Popeye. A lot of those are bacterial in nature, and they almost always tie back to water quality, which almost always ties back to the way the tank is being maintained. So when you're dealing with getting fish better, you have a twofold prong of attack. You've got to take care of the fish, and you have to take care then of the tank, whatever it is that's causing the problem in the first place. So I had him dose the tank with salt. When you add salt to a tank, and a medicinal dose is 1 tablespoon for every 5 gallons. So when you add salt to a tank, most fish tolerate it really well, and it kind of gives their immune systems a break. It gives them a vacation a little bit, because the pathogens that are causing problems usually don't do well when the salt concentration is raised. So what I will do, because 1 tablespoon per 5 gallons is actually a fairly large dose of salt, like for instance my Volifera will often get little skin things, or you'll start seeing a little bit of whitishness happening in the fins because the water quality is deteriorating just enough, and they're more sensitive to it than other fish are. So they get that, and when I see it, I'll usually add half a medicinal dose of salt for the first day, just to see if that clears it up, and it often does. Then if by the second day I don't see any change, I almost never see where it gets worse, but if I don't see any change, then I'll go ahead and I'll add the second half. And then I'll keep that dosage up for at least 3 days and watch them and see if they heal and if they overcome whatever the problem is. Surprisingly, that takes care of an awful lot of the disease kind of stuff. Now, when you're dealing with diseases, there's a really ugly rule that you got to kind of keep in mind. And when I kept aquariums by myself, just as a hobbyist with a couple of tanks, it was always the rule that I was aware of. And if I was lucky, it didn't work out this way. But the rule is that if you have a tank and you've got a sick fish, and you treat that tank, you often lose the fish that initially became sick. The whole goal of treating the tank is to save the rest of the fish in the tank, so they don't get whatever it was that the fish that was sick is doing. Now, the medications I find today are better. I'm finding I write customers now every day on disease issues, and I'm actually kind of surprised how often the fish survive. So it may be the medications, it may be the way things are done today, but the fish do better. But if you happen to lose the fish that initially became ill, particularly if it's a day or two before you're able to treat it, that's just the way it goes. And if you're able to save the rest of the fish in the tank, then you're way ahead of the game, and that's a good thing. So anyway, so he wants to know if you continue the salt, because after 7 days, we still got a little bit of stuff going on. And he treated it with medication once and claims that we still have some issues. So what I told him to do, when I deal with disease issues, I almost never use medications. The only exception might be if I get ick, which I haven't had a case of ick in years. I would add medications to that, because yes, you can go through raising the temperature. Sometimes that in itself will take care of it, in addition to the addition of salt. But the medications for ick are so good, and they wipe it out of the tank, and it's done in a day, and so I'll just usually go that route. And ick is such a non-lethal type of an affliction if you catch it right away, that I'm confident that if I treat the tank with the ick medication, the fish will do well and they'll survive, and if I don't, I take the risk of losing the tank. Whereas some other diseases and other things, I may want to isolate the fish and remove it somewhere else, and then treat both tanks and hope that they survive on both sides. But anyway, so when I use medications, which happens occasionally, I'll get bacterial infections sometimes in heavier stocked Odessa breed Odessa tanks, and when I see some of that, a little bit of hemorrhaging around the gills or on the body, then I immediately treat with something like an API General Cure or something that's bacterially oriented. But when I do use medication, I would never consider doing a dosage, looking at them going, oh, they're still sick, then doing another dosage. I just wouldn't want to do that to the fish. To me, most medications are quite the assault on the fish as well in most cases. And you just want to use it very sparingly. And as I say, I try to use medication as rarely as possible anyway. And then, of course, there's always the expense. If you've got a 50-gallon tank and you want to treat it, and you have to dose it 4 days in a row, and one package costs you $15, and it gives you enough to dose for a day and a half, you find yourself spending $60-70 to treat a tank once to cure something, and you don't really want to go that route if you can help it. So anyway, hopefully that answers the question. What my advice to this gentleman was to go ahead and maintain the salt, because it's harmless to the fish. The fish actually like it. To a point, it's a little messy to work with. I've known pet shops back east that maintain their entire stock that you purchased in salt, a medicinal dose of salt. All their fish were kept in salt. There's a pet shop in Framingham, Massachusetts used to do that, which I thought was odd. For Corys, scaleless cats, didn't matter. Everybody got salt. So anyway, salt usually does really well. The problem with salt is its effect on plants. It will really kind of affect plants really badly over a period of time because they don't like it. Some plants do better than salt, like Java fern, Bobitis fern, Java moss, some of the hardier thick-leaved plants, but some of the regular type things, the Amazon swords and crypts and those kinds of things, don't always do well in salt. So anyway, I advise him to stay in salt for another few days, keep an eye on them, see how they're doing, and then make a point that he's doing whatever in his tank husbandry that's necessary, that they're experiencing a different environment than they were originally. I don't suspect that the tank's probably that's the problem, but if it was my tank and I was doing it, I would certainly want to be sure that I had heavy water changes going on and filtration was clean, at least until they got better and overcame the disease. So anyway, we'll do more videos down the road on diseases and talking more about it, but right now that's like the basic overview. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Okay, Michael writes, we've been in contact before regarding the X-My-Eye that I purchased from you. My question, if you have time, is about your lighting system. I have watched many of your YouTube videos and have failed to note any discussion of your lighting. You demonstrate what appears to be healthy plant growth in most of your tanks. I only have several tanks, two 20-gallon standards and a 55 long. Over the 55, I have two hooded full-spectrum T8 15-watt fluorescent bulbs. I have planted species of Vallisneria and Amazon swords and replanted them several times, with the end result being all plants eventually fade and die. Now I'm using the dreaded plastic plant scenario. As a youth, I had no issues maintaining Vallisneria with old-fashioned incandescent bulbs. What is your secret for keeping plants alive and flourishing? Well, we'll go down to the fish room to answer this question, but before we do that, one basic thing that I do differently than most people, and there's a number of things, and I'll discuss them here in just a moment, but one of them is that many people seem to have this impression that plants do well when they're in a tank that has lots of organic waste or organic matter or dirt in the water. And I've even heard people say, "Oh, you don't need to use fertilizer because if you leave your tank dirty, you let your tank get dirty enough, the plants do really well." In my experience, that's all BS. So plants appreciate a clean tank just as much as the fish do. If you approach keeping your plants like you approach keeping the fish, then your plants do a lot better for you. I do use my Rapid Grow Aquarium Plant Fertilizer, but that is really a small part of it. Basically, if you keep them in fairly clean conditions with water movement and aeration, but the water is still maintained seasoned enough where the fish are being fed on a regular basis, your plants will probably still do quite well for you. And then with the addition of a fertilizer, because we don't have a lot of nutrient-specific supplements going into the water for the plants, you add that to it and you're set, and the plants all seem to do really well here. Another thing I'll mention real quickly before we go down to the room is that algae competes with plants. So if you've got plants in a tank and they're doing well, you're going to have less algae growth because the algae usually will lose out when there's a battle going on. If you've got plants in a tank and they're doing and you start seeing algae developing, then you know that your plants are losing the battle and your algae is starting to win, so you have to do something to boost your plants somehow to get them going well again. But algae shouldn't occur in tanks if your plant growth is good. You might get a little bit of algae, we all do, but as a rule when you see downstairs you'll see very little algae growth. And a big part of that is because of the healthy state of the water and the healthy state of the plants. So anyway, we're going to go down to the fish room. The first thing that people always comment on here before they look at any of the fish are the plants. They say, how in the world do you get the plants to grow like that? Clean water, clean tanks, of course all kept bare bottom. I do use my fertilizer here, but I've always had good luck with the plants. But also I'm blessed with water out of the tap that does well for plants. If your water is really hard or if your pH is high, that's a problem. My pH here is 7.4, but my hardness is only 90 ppm, and plants seem to do really well. Things like Java fern and Bobitis fern are both low-light plants, really hardy. They're floating plants. In fact, if you bury the roots, you'll kill the plant. The roots are structured to take in nutrients from the water. They're not to be put under the substrate. If you have a brick or a stone or whatever, and like with a rubber band, you can attach both the Java fern and the Bobitis to those things, and then the roots will go ahead then and dig in and attach themselves to those items. But as a rule, they do best when the water is constantly moving and when it's clean, and but they do still need the nutrients. So the Rapid Grow Fertilizer works very, very well in this situation. With the exception of the fertilizer, I really don't do anything special for the plants. I don't do anything out of the average or out of the normal. The plants get the same care the fish do. And as you can see, they all really do gangbusters here. And a big part of that is that a lot of the things that people will do to try to get plants to grow well, sometimes I think just don't really help the situation. The lighting isn't anything special. In fact, I can show you here. I just use these standard CFL, I think this is a 40, but I use 40s and 60s. And since those bulbs were first bought, they now have an LED type house light bulb style that is great because it doesn't give off any heat. So I'm gradually switching over to all of those all around the room. And that's all there is for lighting. Those are daylight spectrum bulbs. With the daylight spectrum 60 watt, I have on here two 60 watt equivalent LED house light type bulbs that are on 12 to about 14 hours a day. They go on about 7 in the morning, go off at 10 at night. With all of the plecos here, you'd think I'd have them in each of the tanks to keep the algae down, but I actually don't. I don't have plecos in any of the tanks, and the algae is almost non-existent. So there are a few tanks where you have sections on the glass near a light or something where algae will form, but as a rule, the plants keep the algae pretty much in check. So anyone can keep plants. It was just, for me, it was keeping things simple, keeping things abundant for them, and also the choice of plants that I use. You know, coming across plants that did well and sticking with them and letting them reproduce and keeping them throughout all my tanks. Thank you for watching this video on the fertilizer that is made here, that we use here at Select Aquatics, and also on keeping plants, something we all want to be able to do better at. The next video is going to be on a fish I've been wrestling with for about 6 years. The Synodontis lucipinnis, a very attractive little white catfish with black dots. And I've been wrestling with getting that guy bred, and I'm finally getting some consistency and planning a series of videos down the road on breeding those guys, although they're a lot tougher than the Odessa barbs. But anyway, a full video series on breeding them is in the works, and we'll go over that fish a bit more in 2 weeks. I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.